Have you ever had that feeling? The feeling that someone is watching you, even when you're completely alone. That cold, creeping sensation crawling up your spine, making the hair on your neck stand on end. I ignored that feeling once, and it nearly cost me everything. It started as a regular late-night drive. Just me, my best friend Craig, and miles of empty road ahead. We'd done it 100 times before, driving into the night, letting the world slip away for a while. But that night, something was different. At first, it was just small things. A strange look from a gas station cashier, a sense of unease I couldn't shake. Then, the impossible happened. We kept passing the same road sign, the same streetlight, over and over again, like we were caught in a loop. No matter how far we drove, we weren't getting anywhere. Then, I saw her. A woman in the middle of the road. And behind her, dozens of others watching from the darkness. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late.
By the time I understood the truth, I was already trapped. This is a story I never planned to share. But maybe, just maybe, you'll believe me. Let me take you back to that night. I never used to believe in gut feelings. I thought they were
just superstition, some leftover instinct from a time when we had to worry about predators lurking in the dark. But that night, driving down a lonely stretch of road with nothing but my headlights cutting through the thickening fog, I felt it. A quiet unease settling deep in my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. It had started like any other night, just me, my best friend Craig, and an empty road ahead. Late-night drives had always been our thing, a way to escape from everything for a while, to leave behind the stress of work, responsibilities, and whatever else was weighing on us. There was something peaceful about it. Just the two of us, a full tank of gas, and miles of quiet road stretching endlessly ahead. I was behind the wheel of my 1979 Honda Accord, a car that had been with me longer than I cared to admit. It wasn't much to look at. Faded beige paint, a tape deck that only worked when it wanted to, and an analog clock that ran a few minutes slow no matter how many times I fixed it. But it had character, and it never let me down. It was the kind of car you had to know how to handle. No fancy electronics, no modern conveniences, just a solid old-school machine that ran on instinct as much as skill. Craig sat in the passenger seat, leaning back with his feet up on the dashboard, the red ember of his cigarette glowing in the dim light. He exhaled a slow stream of smoke out the open window, watching the trees blur past. "Man, I don't get why more people don't do this," he said, voice relaxed. "There's something about driving at night. It's like the whole world belongs to you." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Normally, I would have agreed with him. But that night, something felt different. The road was empty. Too empty. We'd been driving for almost an hour, and I hadn't seen a single other car. No headlights in the distance, no taillights disappearing around the bend ahead. Just us, the road, and the dense forest pressing in from either side. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their branches stretching overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. Every now and then, a patch of silver broke through, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. It was the kind of road that felt forgotten. The kind that didn't seem to lead anywhere, just existing out in the middle of nowhere. No houses, no streetlights, no road signs. Just a narrow two-lane strip of cracked asphalt winding deeper into the woods. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling creeping up my spine, but it was getting harder with every passing mile. Craig, of course, didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He was the kind of guy who never let anything get to him. He lived for moments like this, the freedom, the quiet, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the rest of the world. "You're awfully quiet over there," he said, flicking his cigarette out the window. "Everything good?" "Yeah," I said, though even I didn't believe it. "Just thinking, Craig smirked. Dangerous habit, man. You should quit while you're ahead. I forced a chuckle, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. Maybe it was the silence. Not just the absence of other cars, but the complete and total lack of sound. Normally, you'd hear something. Crickets chirping, the distant rustle of an animal moving through the underbrush, the wind shifting through the trees. But there was nothing. Just the soft hum of the car's engine and the occasional crackle of static from the tape deck. I drummed my fingers against the steering wheel, my eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror. The darkness behind us was absolute, swallowing the road like a black hole. There was no sign of the gas station we'd stopped at earlier, no distant glow of headlights approaching from behind. Just emptiness. Vanessa would have told me to turn back. She never liked when I went on these late-night drives. Said they were reckless, that one day something bad would happen. You never know who's out there, she'd tell me, her voice laced with concern. Or what? I used to roll my eyes when she said things like that, told her she was overthinking it, that I knew what I was doing. But now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, just to check the time. 2:30 a.m. Craig glanced over. You texting Vanessa again? Nah, just checking the time. He snorted. Man, you're whipped. I rolled my eyes, but didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. Vanessa and I had been together for 5 years, and yeah, I checked in with her a lot. Not because she asked me to, just because I knew she worried. She was always afraid something would happen to me out here. And for the first time, I was starting to wonder if she had a point. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the lines on the pavement blurring together as the fog thickened. It curled low around the trees, creeping onto the road like fingers reaching out from the shadows. The headlights barely cut through it, making it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. I slowed the car. Craig shot me a look. Why are you slowing down? This fog's getting thick, I said. I can't see shit. He waved a hand dismissively. Come on, man, it's just fog. You act like we're about to drive off the edge of the world. I forced a laugh, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. We drove on in silence for a few more minutes, the fog pressing in closer. The headlights cast strange, shifting shapes along the trees, making it look like they were moving, swaying even though there was no wind. Then the radio crackled. I jumped, my hands tightening on the wheel. A burst of static filled the car, loud and jarring, like 100 whispered voices all talking at once. Craig frowned. The hell? I reached for the dial, turning it down. The static didn't stop. Maybe we're out of range, Craig said, but his voice wasn't as relaxed as before. I nodded, but a cold chill ran down my spine. The static wavered, then stopped. Silence. A different kind of silence than before. Heavier, expectant. Craig shifted in his seat. Okay, that was weird. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on the road, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Then, up ahead, something flickered in the fog. A shape, a figure. For a split second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as we got closer, I realized I wasn't imagining it. There was someone standing in the middle of the road. I sucked in a sharp breath, my foot hovering over the brake. The headlights washed over them. A woman, dressed in white, her long hair hanging in tangled strands around her face. Craig sat up straight. Dude, do you see that? I couldn't speak. The woman didn't move, didn't react to the car barreling toward her. She just stood there, watching. And then, she smiled. My foot slammed on the brakes, the tires screeched, and everything went black. I didn't realize how low we were on gas until I glanced at the fuel gauge, the needle hovering just above empty. I hadn't noticed before, too caught up in the drive, in the silence that was starting to feel heavier by the mile. But now, the warning light flickered on, a dull orange glow breaking up the dim dashboard. Shit, I muttered, nudging Craig with my elbow. "We need gas." He blinked, glancing lazily at the gauge before shrugging. "Guess we should stop then. Not like we want to be stranded out here." That was the last thing I wanted. The road stretched on, winding endlessly through the dense trees, and I started to worry we wouldn't find a gas station in time. The last town had been at least 30 miles back, and we hadn't seen a single sign of civilization since. Just trees and fog. And then, like it had appeared out of nowhere, we saw it. A tiny gas station sitting alone on the side of the road. It was old. Older than old. The kind of place that looked like it had been built decades ago and then left to rot. A single, flickering neon sign buzzed weakly above the entrance, casting a pale, sickly light over the cracked pavement. The gas pumps were ancient, the kind with analog dials instead of digital screens, the metal rusted and peeling. "This place looks welcoming," Craig said dryly, sitting up in his seat. I exhaled, relieved despite how unsettling the place looked. "As long as they have gas, I don't care." I pulled up to the pump, shifting into neutral before turning off the ignition. The headlights cut out, and suddenly, the world outside felt much darker. The trees loomed over the small station, their branches barely moving in the still air. Craig stayed in the car while I stepped out, stretching my legs before heading inside. The air smelled like damp earth and gasoline, a strange combination that made my stomach turn. I pushed open the door, and a small bell above it let out a weak chime. Inside, it wasn't much better. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering in and out as if struggling to stay alive. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dust-covered snacks and faded newspapers. The whole place felt frozen in time, untouched for years. Behind the counter stood a kid, no older than 19 or 20, his face pale and riddled with acne. He was slouched over, scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look up as I approached. "Hey," I said, clearing my throat. He didn't respond immediately. Just stood there, motionless, like he hadn't even heard me. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. There was something off about him. Not in an obvious way. He looked normal enough. But the way he stared at me, like he was looking through me instead of at me, sent a shiver down my spine. "Yeah?" His voice was flat, emotionless. I hesitated. Just need to fill up." He blinked, like it took him a second to process my words, then nodded. "Yeah, sure." There was a long pause, the silence stretching awkwardly between us. I shifted on my feet. "So, do I pay now, or?" The kid kept staring, not blinking. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the counter. "Look, man, is there a problem?" Another pause, then finally he moved. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice like he was telling me a secret. "You should leave." I blinked. "What?" He licked his lips, glancing quickly toward the door before looking back at me. His fingers tapped nervously against the counter. "You shouldn't be out here this late, not on these roads." A chill crawled up my spine. "What are you talking about?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "We're just passing through." He shook his head. "People pass through here all the time." His voice dropped even lower. "Not all of them make it back." Something about the way he said it, the certainty in his tone, made my stomach twist. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to push him for more, to ask him what the hell he meant. But something about the way he was acting, how his eyes kept flicking to the door, how his shoulders were tense like he was waiting for something, made me want to leave. Before I could say anything else, he suddenly straightened, his expression snapping back to neutral. "That'll be $28.50 for the gas," he said, voice hollow again, as if the last minute hadn't even happened. I hesitated, watching him. His face was blank, but his fingers still tapped against the counter, like a nervous tick. I handed him the cash, grabbed my change, and left. The second I stepped outside, the air felt different, heavier. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was suffocating. Waiting. I filled the tank as fast as I could. When I climbed back into the car, Craig glanced over at me. "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah, let's just get out of here." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. I started the engine, and that's when I saw him, the kid, standing in the doorway of the gas station, staring. He wasn't moving, not blinking, just watching as we pulled away. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, pushing down the unease curling in my stomach. The station disappeared behind us, swallowed by the darkness. I let out a slow breath, trying to shake the feeling creeping over my skin. But the relief didn't last long, because that's when I noticed something else. The road. Something was wrong. I frowned, gripping the wheel tighter. "Hey, Craig, check the map." He shot me a confused look. "Why?" "Just check," he sighed, grabbing the crumpled map from the dashboard and unfolding it. He flicked on the small flashlight, scanning the roads. A few seconds passed, then, "Dude," he said, his voice tight. "This doesn't make sense." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He turned the map toward me. "We should be heading toward the highway." I glanced at the road ahead, my stomach twisting into knots. We weren't. The trees were getting thicker, the fog rolling in heavier, and then, up ahead, something loomed in the distance. A streetlight, its glow flickering weakly. Beneath it stood a sign. Craig's breath hitched. "Golden, 2 miles." I felt my hands go cold. "That can't be right," I said, shaking my head. "Golden is north of here, miles north. There's no way we ended up." Craig turned to me, his face pale. "Then how the hell are we here?" I didn't have an answer, because we'd been driving in a straight line. And yet, somehow, impossibly, neither did I. I put the car back in gear, slamming my foot on the gas. We sped forward, the headlights slicing through the dense fog. We had to get out of here. We had to. And then, up ahead, the streetlight came into view again. But this time, something was different. Something was waiting for us. Craig sucked in a breath, his entire body going rigid. Figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the glow of the streetlight, lined up along the edge of the trees. I couldn't make out their faces. They were just shapes, dark and unmoving, their heads all tilted slightly like they were listening to something, or waiting. But one figure stood closest to the road, the woman. She was standing directly beneath the streetlight now, her body illuminated in the sickly glow. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, terrified. Her mouth moved, forming silent words. And then, slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed behind us. A chill ripped through me. I didn't want to look, but I had to. My hands trembled as I glanced at the rearview mirror, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. A figure was sitting in the back seat, inside the car. Craig hadn't noticed yet. He was too busy staring ahead at the woman, at the figures in the woods. But I saw it. And as my breath hitched in my throat, as my vision blurred with pure terror, the figure smiled, a wide, unnatural grin, too many teeth. The headlights flickered and, then, everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed, bright lights, the steady beep of a heart monitor, the sharp scent of antiseptic. I blinked slowly, my body aching from head to toe. My arm was in a sling. My head was bandaged. Vanessa was there. The moment my eyes met hers, she let out a choked sob, rushing to my side. "Oh my God, you're awake," she whispered, gripping my hand tightly. I tried to speak. My throat was raw. The car... My voice cracked. Craig. Her face twisted in confusion. She shook her head. Baby. Who's Craig? The words hit me like a hammer. I opened my mouth. Nothing. I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember anything about him. And yet, deep, in the pit of my stomach, I knew he had been real, hadn't he? I turned my head, staring out the hospital window. The sky was dark. The trees swayed gently outside, and in the reflection, for just a split second, I saw someone standing behind me, smiling. I didn't sleep that first night in the hospital. Not even for a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That smile, stretched too wide, filled with too many teeth. And the worst part? Every time I tried to picture Craig, really picture him, I couldn't. His face blurred in my memory, slipping away the harder I tried to grasp onto it. I could recall the sound of his laugh, the smell of the cigarettes he always smoked. Even the way he used to prop his feet up on my dashboard like he owned the damn car. But his face? Gone. Like it had never been there to begin with. Vanessa stayed by my side, her fingers interlaced with mine, squeezing tightly every time she caught me zoning out. She was scared. Scared for me. Scared of me. Because when I finally told her what had happened, when I tried to explain everything, I saw the way her expression shifted. The way concern turned into something else, something I couldn't quite name. Pity, doubt, fear, I didn't know, and I didn't have the energy to figure it out. The doctor said I was lucky, that jumping out of the car at such high speed should have killed me, or at the very least, left me paralyzed. Instead, I got away with a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a severe concussion. That was it. And yet, as I sat there in that too bright hospital room, I didn't feel lucky. I felt hunted, watched. The police came to ask questions the next morning. 2 officers, one middle-aged with a thick mustache, the other younger, barely out of his 20s. Their names didn't matter. Their words did. "We found your car," the mustached one said, flipping open a notepad. "Totaled against a tree, just like you said. But here's the thing." He glanced at his partner before looking back at me. There was no one else in it. I felt the breath hitch in my throat. No one else. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Did you check the woods? Maybe Craig." The younger officer shifted on his feet. "Sir, we ran your plates, looked through all your records. There's no one named Craig associated with you. No missing persons report matching your description. We even checked the footage from the last gas station you stopped at." I felt my stomach tighten. No, that wasn't possible. You were alone. My head started to spin. No. "He was right next to me," I said, my voice almost pleading. "He was sitting in the passenger seat. We've been friends for years." "Sir," the officer interrupted, a bit more firmly this time, "we're not trying to say you're lying, but maybe the accident, your head injury, maybe it's causing some confusion?" Confusion. That's what they called it. That's what Vanessa called it later that night, too. She sat on the edge of my bed, brushing my hair back gently, her touch warm but distant. "You've been through a lot," she whispered. Maybe Craig was just part of the trauma, a way for your brain to process what happened." I stared at her. I could see the logic in what she was saying. I wanted to believe it, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things, because something else was out there, something that had taken Craig's place, something that had smiled at me with a mouth full of too many teeth. I was discharged 3 days later. Vanessa drove me home, her hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. She hadn't let me out of her sight since the accident, hovering near me like she was afraid I'd disappear the second she looked. Away. And honestly, I wasn't sure she was wrong. I felt off, like a piece of me had been left behind in that car wreck, buried under the twisted metal and shattered glass. The first night home, I tried to sleep. I really did. But something wouldn't let me. Every time I drifted off, I felt it. A presence. Standing just outside my bedroom door. Watching. Waiting. At first, I thought it was Vanessa, that she had gotten up to check on me. But when I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty, completely still, and yet, I swear I could hear breathing. Slow, shallow, right there, right in front of me. But there was nothing. There. I shut the door, locked it, didn't sleep at all. The text started the next night. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed. I reached for it instinctively, still half out of it. The screen lit up. Unknown number. Hey, man, you up for a drive? My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I knew. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I know a good spot. Middle of nowhere. No traffic. Just like old times. I sat up, my breath coming in sharp gasps. My ribs ached, my arm throbbed. Another text. Unknown number. What's wrong? You forgetting me again? I dropped the phone. I could still hear the buzz of another incoming message, but I didn't look. I didn't want to look. I just grabbed the phone, yanked out the battery, and threw it across the room. Vanessa found me like that in the morning, curled, up against the wall, my body shaking, my eyes bloodshot. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. She just wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." But she was wrong, because that night I woke up to the sound of my car alarm blaring. I bolted upright, heart hammering, pain shooting through my ribs as I stumbled to the window. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlight, my car sat in the driveway. The driver's side door was open. The alarm was screaming into the night, but there was no one there. I stood frozen, my fingers digging into the windowsill. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the alarm cut off. Silence. Waited, breath shallow. Then, a shape moved in the darkness. Someone was sitting in the passenger seat, not moving, not getting out, just sitting there. And then, the overhead light inside the car flickered on. For half a second, I saw it. That grin. Wide, unnatural, too many teeth, and then, the light flickered out. The seat was empty, but I knew better. I knew it wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Waiting for me to get behind the wheel again. Waiting for the next drive. And this time, I wasn't sure if I'd make it back. The police never found Craig. They scoured the crash site, combing through the wreckage and the surrounding woods, but all they found was my car, smashed against the tree, and the passenger door hanging wide open. No blood, no footprints leading away. No sign that anyone had been sitting beside me at all. They asked me the same questions over and over, trying to make sense of the mess. Are you sure you weren't alone? Is it possible you misremembered? Could it have been the concussion? Didn't have answers for them. Because how do you explain that someone who never existed was just gone? The more they pressed, the more I realized how insane I sounded. So I did what they wanted. I told them I must have been confused, that I hit my head too hard, that I must have imagined Craig. It was a lie, and I think they knew it, because before they left, one of the officers, the older one with the mustache, lingered by the door. He watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice low enough that Vanessa couldn't hear, he said, "You're not the first, you know." My breath caught in my throat. What? He adjusted his belt, casting a glance at the open case file in his hand. People get lost out there sometimes. Take a wrong turn. End up in places they shouldn't be. He hesitated, and every once in a while, they come back talking about someone that never existed. My stomach twisted. He gave me a tight nod and turned to leave, and just like that, the case was closed. A simple accident, nothing else. 2 weeks passed. Vanessa hovered over me every second of the day, watching me like I might shatter if she looked away for too long. I couldn't blame her. I wasn't the same person anymore. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Craig, if that was even his name, waiting for me. But he never was. And that somehow was worse. Then, one night, an email landed in my inbox. No, sender. No subject, just a single message. You made it out. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Another message popped up. You were at my dad's station. I saw you. I sat forward, my breath coming short. It was him, the cashier, the kid from the gas station. I didn't even have time to process before another message arrived. My dad has seen them before. My fingers shook as I typed out a reply. Who? Who has he seen? For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, finally, the ones that pretend. The word sent a sharp chill through my spine. I forced myself to type. Pretend to be what? This time, the reply came faster. People. The room suddenly felt too small, too cold. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edges of the laptop. The thing in my car. Craig. What was it? The reply was instant, not Craig. I felt something in my chest snap. I gritted my teeth, forcing my trembling fingers to type one last question. Then who was he? For a long moment, there was nothing. Then slowly, the typing indicator blinked to life. They don't have names. My stomach twisted. The cursor blinked. Another message appeared. But they like to be invited in. My breath hitched. The kid's last message came a few seconds later. That's why they pretend to be someone you already trust. The ghostly woman, her face, the way she stood in the middle of the road. I thought she had been haunting me. I thought she had been the threat. But she wasn't. She was warning me. She had been trying to stop me, trying to get me to look, and I hadn't. Listened, I had let it in, welcomed it into my car, into my life. And the worst part? I still didn't remember Craig. Not really. Just vague flashes of conversations, bits of laughter, moments that felt planted in my mind rather than lived. And that's when I understood. There was never a Craig. Not really. There was only it. And it had been waiting for me to take that drive, waiting for me to forget just enough, waiting for me to be alone. It could have been anyone. It could have been Vanessa. It could have been my brother. It could have been someone I had never even met, and I never would have known the difference. Not until it was too late. Not until I was already trapped, just like so many others had been before me. Just like so many others would be after. The realization made me sick, made me feel like my own memories weren't my own anymore. I shut my laptop, pressing my palms into my eyes. Deep down, I knew I should delete the emails. Block the sender, forget, but I wouldn't, I couldn't. Because forgetting was how they got you. Forgetting is what they wanted, and I would never make that mistake again. I don't drive at night anymore. Not ever. If I have to go somewhere after dark, Vanessa takes the wheel. But sometimes when I'm out late with her, when the world is quiet and the roads stretch empty ahead of us, I feel it. The weight of eyes that aren't there. The sensation of something just out of sight. Something waiting. And sometimes when I look into the rearview mirror, just for a second, A flicker of a figure sitting in the back seat, smiling, and then gone. Last night, I woke up to a text, an unknown number. I almost didn't check it, but something inside me knew I had to. I picked up my phone, my breath caught in my throat. The message was short, simple. Hey man, you up for a drive? I don't take late-night drives anymore, and I never will again. There's something about the empty roads, the quiet, the darkness stretching endlessly ahead, something that doesn't feel the same as it used. I used to love it. That feeling of freedom, of going anywhere, of escaping from everything for a little while. Now, I know better. Because the thing about the dark, you're never really alone in it. And sometimes, when you're driving through the middle of nowhere, when the road feels like it's repeating, when the silence presses in just a little too tightly, something is watching, waiting. For you to invite it in. So if you ever find yourself on an unfamiliar road late at night, if you ever pass the same street light or sign more than once, if your passenger doesn't seem quite right, don't stop. Don't check your mirrors. And whatever you do, don't let it in. But now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A moment that made you question reality? Maybe a strange encounter, a ghostly figure, or a feeling you just couldn't shake? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading them. And if you thought this story was terrifying, wait until you hear about my next one, because some roads lead you back home, and others, they don't let you leave at all. Stay tuned.